All right. Well, again, welcome out. We have a lot to talk about. There's a lot happening at the Utah legislature. So we just wanted to jump right on into things and get into some of what is taking place. So we have just a quick overview again. Here at Believe, we feel strongly that you are good and that there's a lot you can do to help build good in this world. This is one of our mottos for this year, to be the one. And we openly encourage each person to do something on an issue that they care about or that resonates with them is important. It's important for us to reach out and contribute to that. And so the law is complex, certainly, but pieces of it can definitely be understood. There's no person that I know of that understands all of it. We don't have to understand all of it to be able to make a good difference with it. So again, come in, learn your pieces, learn your parts. And if you missed the overview last week, those are available on YouTube now, and you can see those. And some of the things discussed there as well as how to read the bills a little bit better. And then finally, we just ask that during this time, we be engaged, we share our thoughts and opinions, but we have respect and civility. We don't appreciate name calling. We don't appreciate putting other people down. Each bill that's there is meant to address a concern or issue in society. It doesn't mean, again, that means that we're addressing it the correct way or that the government should be involved in that necessarily. Those are questions we can talk about. But the issues are real, the concerns are real, and we need to be respectful of that. So, starting there, just wanted to open it up and ask if any of you have bills that are of particular interest to you. I haven't looked at all of them yet. But if you do have some that are of particular interest, we can start there. I have a number that might be of interest to you that we can go through today as well. But let me know, because we want to make this an interactive discussion for sure to go through these. So if you have something on your mind, let me know about it. You can put it in chat, or you can just speak up. It's fine to unmute yourself and speak up as well.
I'm interested in House Bill 215, just the Utah Fits All bill.
Okay. Let's see. So let's go. If you're, imagine that most of you are on an electronic device if you're here with us. So if you go to le.utah.gov, you can click on bills and then the 2023 general session bills, and then click on the HB 200 to 249 to get to HB 215, which is funding for teacher salaries and optional education opportunities. This bill has an article in the Deseret News this morning, I think, featured on KSL as well. And so we will pull it up here on the screen. Let's see. All right, so we have a bill. You can read the highlighted provisions. There's quite a few. The general description says that this bill establishes the Utah Fits All Scholarship Program and provides funding for the program and a doubling of a teacher salary supplement. So it looks like they're proposing to give teachers more money with this bill, as well as establishing what they call the Utah Fits All Scholarship Program. This bill talks about the teacher salaries being increased with some direct appropriations from the legislature, but then it also talks about establishing other choices in education. And what this means, if you go through this bill and start looking down here, it starts out kind of tame looking. There's very little underlined at the start. It starts talking about this Utah Fits All scholarship program that they're going to put into place. But then we start getting into where the meat of a lot of what's taking place is happening with this Utah Fits All scholarship program. So what this is proposing, what this program is proposing, is that they're saying that all children should have the right to homeschool or public or private school. And that if they're not in the public school system, it's saving the state money. And so the theory behind this is that, talking about right here, theory is that the state actually pays to parents of children, school-age children, up to $8,000 per year to help offset the cost of private education or to be used for materials for homeschooling. So just at a first blush, just curious what you guys think of just that notion in general, paying money to homeschool families or families that want to private school, giving them up to $8,000 a year from tax dollars.
What bill number was that?
That's HB 215.
215?
Yeah.
I think for homeschool, that's a lot of money per student. And I mean, if you were looking at private schools, that probably, depending upon the private school you go, that could be maybe how much it is for tuition, potentially.
Yeah, it's quite a bit of money. I know we homeschool 5 of our children currently, and I don't think we've ever had 1 year yet where we spent $8,000 on homeschooling. But that is, and it is interesting to say, you know, I actually spoke with the bill sponsor about this one, Kirk Collimore. He's the floor sponsor in the Senate. And I said, why are you giving homeschoolers so much money? I said, I don't know of any homeschoolers that spend that much money on this. And he said, well, we want to make sure that they get the money that they save the state by not putting their kids in public school. So I guess some of the questions asked is, do any of you have any strong feelings on whether or not the government should take public tax money and give it to private institutions or entities like a private school or a private family?
Yeah, I have big concerns on that bill. Like who's funding that, who will get the curriculum contract. Yeah, this is the first I've seen this bill. I've been waiting for it to come out.
Mhm.
Where's all the big money behind it?
Well, a lot of the money comes from, well, I guess there's 2 sources of funds you might be talking about. The legislature's proposing to use tax dollars to fund the $8,000 a year,
So
but
will
they're
that
also,
come from income tax?
yes, yeah.
And also, who disperses these funds?
In this bill, what's set up is that there's supposed to be an intermediary, a private institution that's hired, and it can receive, there's actually a typo in the bill as they released it this morning. But it's supposed to say they can receive the lesser of 5% of the amount of money that the government appropriates, or $2.5 million. And so they essentially get paid up to $2.5 million per year,
And then they disperse the funds?
and then they disperse the funds. Yeah.
Is that legal under Utah Constitution?
Well, it's good you ask. There's a serious question on that that the legislature recognizes. And they did something in this bill that I've never seen anyone do before. So I want to show you that. If you can see the screen, this is a long bill, so we won't have time to unpack it all today. We can continue discussions on it for sure, because I haven't read the whole thing. This just came out a couple hours ago. But we have a portion here at the bottom. Sorry, there's a lot of text. Right here, severability. I guess above this, the legal proceedings portion. So we're down on line 1047.
Whoa.
So they are concerned about constitutional challenges to this bill. And they say if any provision of this part is the subject of a state or federal constitutional challenge in a state court, because the state can't say what happens in a federal court. So they say if it happens in a state court, we're going to grant scholarship students and scholarship students' parents the right to intervene as a matter of right in the lawsuit to defend the program's constitutionality.
Whoa, could you explain what that means?
Yeah. So it's again, I've never seen this. Generally, in a republic, we elect people, officers, government officials to act for us. And here in Utah, we've elected the state attorney general. We've delegated powers to him to defend the constitutionality of state laws. So in general, the state attorney general has the obligation, if there's a legal challenge filed to the constitutionality of something, they are the ones that defend that lawsuit.
So the
And so
people
we saw
they've given
this.
money to would have to defend that. Is that?
Sorry, what was that?
So the people that take the money for the scholarship would have to defend that as constitutional?
They don't have to. It's a may. So if you look here, the may in the law gives them the permission to if they want to. But it says they may intervene. So they can step in essentially as their own attorney general to represent the state of Utah's interests in this. They're not representing the state of Utah itself, but they're representing the interests of the state of Utah in defending this law. And they can come in and put in their own arguments. So essentially they're saying, if one person lodges a challenge to this, if a group sues to say this is unconstitutional, usually you're dealing with one group on the other side, the Attorney General's office. But here now with this type of law in place, you could literally possibly have dozens to hundreds of people intervene, dozens to hundreds of attorneys that you're now trying to defend against or, argue this is unconstitutional. And so it opens up this huge defense network for the state where a lot more people that are interested in continuing to receive the funds can jump into the lawsuit. Again, I've never seen anything like that. I haven't seen all the laws in existence, but I've done a lot of constitutional work in my time, and I've never seen that before. So they are concerned about constitutional challenges to this under the Constitution, because what's happening, and this gets into, what's the proper role of government? We have public tax dollars, so they're taking money from people, and then they're saying we're going to choose who we give this money to. And they've chosen now to give it to private schoolers, homeschoolers. And at a fundamental level, this bill also goes through and says these people can do whatever they want with it, provided it's educational, within certain realms of educational. The rules are pretty loose because they're trying very hard to say, we're not going to regulate you. We're not going to come in and take over your private school. But I personally have a serious issue. If we're taking tax dollars and giving it to people, I personally feel there is a moral duty that we should be accountable for our receipt and use of the funds, because it's not our money. It's coming from someone else. And I believe that all government funds spent should be spent with accountability in place. But private schoolers, homeschoolers, they don't want government oversight, which is one reason why they left public school. And so they're saying here, because this bill came up last year, it was called the Hope Scholarship last year.
Right.
This year it's called the Utah Fits All Scholarship. They're changing their terminology, they're changing a lot of the things, but in principle it's the same. And so as it stands with my 5 children I homeschool, I could apply for up to $40,000 a year. And there was many years in my wife and I's marriage where we lived on $40,000 a year to support us. And it wasn't all that long ago that was happening. So it's a lot of money. a lot of money. And to me, there's a lot of, to me, there's some high concerns around this. Because I don't feel personally that the government should be facilitating a lot of private transactions. I think we get into a lot of serious issues in society.
so I haven't seen the bill before, but so is there something in there that's going to keep the home schools and the private schools independent of the state?
So currently it says that. So the language of the bill, let's see if we can see it here.
There's a lot on this bill.
There's a lot in it.
And on 737, they're saying that line 737 starting there start to say like the autonomy that the home school and private schools can have. But I'm not quite sure how to understand it because it says that. But then after, I can't remember exactly where it's at, but then there's another section that says what the eligible requirements are. And it goes through and says there has to be certain requirements met for them to become a provider and this and that. So on 737, they say they can't choose your curriculum, but then later on they say qualifying, is that it right there? Qualifying. Oh no, there's the autonomy around 737, but then I'd have to look at it again and find the numbers for the.
Yeah, no, thanks for bringing that part up. So looking at it here, this is the important thing to understand for the moment about it. It says that nothing here essentially in this bill expands the regulatory authority of the state office holder, or an LEA, which is a local educational association or something. It's the school districts essentially, to impose any additional regulation of a qualifying provider. Then it says, this is the key term, beyond any regulation necessary to administer this part. So they keep saying over and over again, we're not going to regulate you. We're just giving it to you. But then to Phelan's point that she's making, but there are criteria in it, which again, I personally think if the government's going to give money to people, there should be criteria about how it's used. I don't think we should just give money to people to, I don't know. I don't believe the state should be funding, for example, purchase of Pokemon cards. I know that that's a big thing in some educational circles that people believe there's a lot of educational opportunities through Pokemon. Maybe there is, but I don't feel like my tax dollars or someone else's tax dollars need to fund the purchase of Pokemon cards under the claim that they're educational. And again, maybe they are. I'm not saying they're not, but just from the perspective of, if you go into a scenario where you start giving money to people, they start deciding what's educational, what's not, it's going to create a lot of friction in society as people start to say, wait, you went to Disneyland for your educational thing, or you bought a nice new grand piano with that money, and then you sold it 3 months later and pocketed that money. What's going on here? How's this looking? And I think that inevitably what happens is people start asking questions, they start demanding an audit, they start demanding oversight, which is, again, from my perspective, if you're taking government funds, you should expect that. And what inevitably comes as we get into it is the regulations always increase to become more necessary to say, well, this isn't. Oh, well, you got to prove that you're really educating your kids, which means we're going to start to get to testing and other things. Currently in the bill, they don't require testing. They have optional testing parents can opt into, but it's not required at the moment. But to me, the question is, what are we creating right now? What kind of structures? Because the law always builds on itself. It always becomes something else. And when we embark into something new like this, a whole new program, a whole new system, what does it create? And I'm curious if any of you have thoughts about what it creates if we start going down this path as a state, what this becomes over time. a good thing, a bad thing?
I think you're going to create a monster if you don't have any kind of regulation. People are going to look at this and say, wow, I can get $8,000 a year per child if I homeschool my kid and no questions asked. I think you'll see a run on homeschooling, and it won't be a very effective homeschooling because they're just doing it for the money. Without any kind of regulation, you got to regulate, you got to have some kind of standard that you're using this money for. That's just ridiculous to hand out money to people that say, oh, I'm just going to homeschool my kids.
Yeah, I agree. I look at it where I grew up in Magna, Utah, and I think that could be real appealing to homeschool. And again, they say to their on their side. I spoke with the bill sponsor in person, and I raised that concern. He said, "Well, he says this intermediary that we're hiring, they're supposed to approve the receipts to make sure it's educational." I said, "Well, okay." I said, "So let's say that I go out and purchase an iPad. It's educational. It gets reimbursed. What stops me from selling it? Right after and pocketing that money, and then buying an iPad again next year and selling it, and again next year and selling it. And what stops me as a homeschool dad from saying to another homeschool family, hey, guess what? Let's just both set up a private school. I'll educate your kids, you educate mine. I charge $4,000, you charge $4,000. And now we just both pocketed money because now we're private school teachers." I don't think it's going to take very long at all for people to figure out, hey, there's all kinds of ways to get money here. And then are we helping education? Are we hurting it? Does money solve the education issue? Is that what families need? I don't know, but those are some good points. Melissa had said in chat, it creates a society dependent on the government, which is an issue when we talk about when further issues arise. If we grow up in a society where the government solves all of our problems, we turn to them for answers still. And that's becoming an increasingly common thing among all political parties, is many times we want the government to solve our problems. And it creates a dependency issue that for some don't have concerns about, others have a lot of concern about. But that is a point. There any other thoughts about what this becomes over time?
Yeah, this is Ralph. I don't know if you can hear me.
Yeah, I can.
Okay, so coming from a standpoint of a guy that's raised his family, I no longer have any school-aged children. Obviously, this does nothing for me other than they're still collecting taxes from me.
Yeah.
Wouldn't it behoove us to be pushing for some kind of tax break for the folks that choose to homeschool off of, because there's obviously at least one parent working in the home. So wouldn't it behoove the state to just give a tax break, not take in that tax money? Because it's like what you've talked about before. Once they take that tax money in and then they start pushing it out to everybody, eventually there starts to be earmarks, or like you say, more and more regulation. This seems to be pretty broad stroked, and in a year's time, how many complaints are going to come in to where they think they need to come in and put a bunch of stipulations on that money. Now they're back into full control, which the reason for people homeschooling is to get out from under that thumb on your head, right? And be able to teach your kids how you see fit. I spent some of my years being homeschooled by my mom. I spent some of it in public school. So I can see benefits to both sides, but it's all based on an individual. Some people learn better in a homeschool environment, which I did really well there. Some people learn better in a public school environment. But I really think this is a bad bill that, taking out of the fund and then giving, what'd you say, 2.5 million Is that per year to some entity?
Yep. Yep, they get paid that to be the intermediary essentially that approves receipts and things.
So we're paying out a ton of money to somebody to disperse money when really they could just not collect it from you, from your wife, from, whoever is choosing to go another route with that education, choosing not to collect the money from them through,
Yeah,
income tax,
yep.
or give some kind of income tax break. I mean, this thing is horrible, in my opinion.
Yeah, and so that was something I talked with the sponsor about directly. Said, hey, why don't you guys go on the tax credit route? Because if your concern is saying, hey, you're saving the state money, so we should give you that money back. So the tax credit makes more sense, like you're saying. His response was that he said that the intent of the bill is to create competition for public schools. The intent is to make it so public schools have to compete for funding so that they are incentivized to become better. And so part of the theory behind this is they say, well, in Utah, we have this constitutional requirement that the government provide education for kids. And since we've kind of created a monopoly on the market, they're claiming the only way to solve that monopoly issue is to facilitate more options for people so that people can leave the system and go and compete. And then if they leave, there's some funding pulled from the schools, and they then have to figure out how to compete, improve, become better. And so part of the theory is to create that competition. In his opinion, a tax credit doesn't do that because most of the people with children in school aren't paying an incredible amount towards the income tax. Most of schooling is being paid for by people without children at home.
Yeah, I just started thinking about that when you start talking about that, because there's guys like myself. I work at a job that pays me really well, and I also have a side business, so I pay a lot in taxes.
Yeah.
So that money's still going into the coffer, and so I don't know if that, I guess maybe a tax break overall, but especially somebody who's homeschooling their children, because I've watched my mom scrape by when she was trying to homeschool us. I have some family members that they choose to homeschool their kids, and it can get expensive. And I don't know if there'd be a way to do a tax break and then something like this. I don't know. This just seems too broad brushstroke to me.
Yeah. Well, I think, from my perspective, if you look back at the history, and even just going back a little ways to COVID, when the federal government came out with a couple mandates about vaccinations, where they said, hey, if you're a healthcare worker, you need to get vaccinated. And then they said, hey, in all businesses with 100 or more employees, you need to require your people to get vaccinated too. And ultimately, both of those requirements were challenged in court, and one survived and one didn't in court, meaning they said the government had the power for one, but not the other. And the one that survived, the mandate that survived, was the one tied to federal funding. So health workers, the regulation came through, if you want to continue to receive Medicare and Medicaid funding, then any institution that receives those has to have everyone vaccinated. And that regulation survived because going back to the 1930s, when the federal government, so it used to be the federal government didn't have the power to collect income tax because the founders knew there were issues with that. They limited the federal government's power to tax. They gave them some power to tax. The federal government tried to pass an income tax in the 1890s, I think. It was struck down as unconstitutional under the Constitution as written. And so they passed the 16th Amendment. And I think they convinced, the states that getting some money from other people and places would be a good thing, and it'll just be a little bit. And so the income tax amendment came, which authorized the federal government to collect income taxes. But when that happened, by the 1930s, income tax rates had shot up sky high. You know, I think at one point in US history, income tax bracket for the highest wage earners went to 94%. That they were taking. But with it in the 30s, they had these programs come in where they said, we're going to start to fund. So they took money from the states and the people, and then they said, we'll give it back to you. But when they gave it back, they said, traditionally, we don't have the power to regulate here. This isn't an authority we've been given, but we'll give you money. And you don't have to do what we say, but if you don't do what we say, you don't get the money. And that was how the federal government created the Department of Education. That's how the federal government has Common Core, all these other things. It's through the strings tied to federal funding. And there was a Supreme Court justice in the 1930s that said, well, this is crazy. He said this will completely allow the government to circumvent all constitutional checks and balances on its powers. Because if it has the power to take money from people, it can then circumvent any restriction just by saying it's not required. But if you want the money, you have to do it. And so that's something that the reps say often. They say, look, Austin, if you have concerns with this, don't do it. Don't take the money. But what do you think happens to the homeschool world or the private school world when the government funds come in that 80, 90% of other people take? Any thoughts on that?
I'm with you on you know, when they they send it out with earmarks like you're saying, and so if there's the people that choose not to take it are essentially choosing not to have the hand of government in their personal life, and unfortunately that's the route you have to go with it. And my concern with this is eventually they're going to come down with that heavy hand of what the requirement is to be able to get the money. And once you're used to getting the money, it's hard to say no.
It is, but even let's say that there's a family that doesn't take it. They say, we don't want the regulation to come down on us at some point. They don't take it. Currently in the homeschool world, the culture's changed since 20 years ago with homeschooling, where there's a lot of co-ops, a lot of parents that work together with things, a lot of families, they teach kids, they've created some really cool debate leagues and other things. And there's a lot of free work that goes on, parents volunteering and doing things. But if suddenly every family knows the other family has $8,000 per kid to spend, they're not going to keep doing things for free. And so suddenly, if you have a culture where people have been able to homeschool and scrap by and make it work, it's now going to become expensive to be a part of anything. The curriculum prices go up. Access to other co-ops and groups go up. You know, if you have suddenly ability to pay money for karate and there's a lot more people doing it, prices tend to go up. And with private schools, for example, let's say private school tuition's $10,000 a year, suddenly the government puts $8,000 more a year into that. Does that mean that private schools stay at 10,000 and just say, oh, sweet, we can pick up more students? Or did they say, we know that the base for everyone is 8,000 and we can make a lot more money? And so what starts to happen is it starts to really change when government money flows into things. I don't know of a situation where government money goes into something and prices get cheaper. It usually starts to inflate prices, raise prices, which then makes the culture very difficult for people that aren't doing something, to the point, like you say, where, well, then we have a whole culture. We don't have a system anymore. The private school system's super expensive. My kids have friends there. They have all these things. And at that point, when new regulations come, we've kind of potentially, already let that ship sail back when the funds came available. And so, sorry, what was that?
The question has to be asked: has the government ever stepped into anything and actually fixed it?
The only thing that I see potentially is founding fathers, Revolutionary War type thing. There are some situations where I would say, yeah, maybe the government's created some good infrastructure. Like there are some core functions of government where I think they've done some good things, but when they start expanding into the private sphere, I haven't seen it go well. I've seen it delay things.
I guess I should have been more specific with into the private sector. They tend to come in and make it a flop when it comes into stuff like that, and I see where this is going. I think it's terrible.
And again, I just look at it from the perspective of, let's say you wanted to help people homeschool. Why are you giving them 8,000? Because it's kind of like saying, oh, we want to help people get a car. Cars cost on average 10,000. Oh, so let's give everybody 50,000 to get a car. And you go, it doesn't cost that much. You know, why is there so much money coming into homeschooling?
So you'll start seeing a lot of inflation, like what you're talking about in those co-ops, in the private schooling, in all of those sectors. That's basically what it creates, is inflation in those areas, to where now instead of 10,000, you're paying 18,000.
Yeah.
So that doesn't really help.
Yeah. So it's a concern. You know, it's certainly one that I think we should talk to our reps about, whether we support it or not. There are some protections they put in. They tried to clean it up a lot from the Hope Scholarship from last year, but in my opinion, it still has a lot of the fundamental flaws and issues that will just significantly change things and produce a lot of consequences that won't be that great. But you know, it's one for you to decide on and look at. It will be a hot topic. There are a lot of people talking about that one, but I would encourage you to weigh in on it. We had a request for HB 220 emissions reduction amendments. And this is one that I did look at a little bit ahead of time. So I have seen this one some. And let's see. So Jill, did you have any particular thoughts you wanted to share, concerns, or just review through this?
There's a lot of concerns on it. If I knew how to really read these bills, I wouldn't be on the Zoom call. But yeah, there's a lot of concerns I have on this. Another long bill, but it looks like they're going to regulate people's emissions for dryers, fireplaces, cars, old trucks. This is looking to me like it's going to tie in with some sort of, it's not the ESG, maybe ESG rating, but your carbon rating, your digital ID stuff.
Yeah, your carbon footprint.
Yeah, that this is going to tie into it, whether your footprint's good or bad. And here's all the stuff they want to get rid of, you know, burning wood in your wood burning stove. Looks like they're targeting the older cars and trucks, appliances, your water heaters, fireplaces. So
yes, so all those things are happening. So for example, here in the line 35, you can see that they want to prohibit wood burning for heating. So if you're going to burn wood, you're doing it for aesthetics, not for heating, right? Kidding. But that is a concern. You know, just do we even have the basic freedom to heat through wood or not? Obviously, there are health issues. We all live in a bowl. I'll breathe the same air. And we are trying to find a way to figure out how to balance these things, because Salt Lake consistently ranks as really low air quality across the nation. The EPA has actually mandated the Salt Lake County Act to help clean things up. That's one reason why we have the HOV lanes, for example. It's because the EPA has been pushing to, that's one of their solutions to air pollution, is to encourage carpooling. So there's fewer cars on the road, which is what the HOV lanes are supposed to do. And so this bill, just at a high level, goes through, and one of the things it does is it puts in a goal to say we have to reduce carbon emissions 50% by 2030, which is a pretty aggressive push. And then they're going to say you're going to pay to pollute, is one of the theories of this bill. And so if you have something that's considered to be a higher polluting thing, you're going to pay more in your yearly registration to get that through. So for example, I have a big van. I have almost 8 children, And the van doesn't get as good gas mileage as some other vehicles. So it would be in the higher polluting category. It would be pretty expensive to relicense under this bill. But I'm also transporting an incredible number of people per gallon per mile compared to those that are doing 1 person at 40 miles to the gallon. Per person, I'm transporting more people at a better rate still. But that's not taken into account here. So they do go through a number of these things. They talk about this road usage program related to restrictions on driving on bad air quality days. They say that they're proposing to ban, where was it? Ban the operation of certain vehicles on certain air quality days. So maybe on a bad day, I don't know for sure where my vehicle falls in this. I can't tell from the bill. But maybe I wouldn't be able to take my kids out on certain days if my van doesn't get good enough gas mileage for them. And so there are a lot of changes proposed here. You can see quite a few laws being affected. And Jill, just to go over quickly as you look at this, these ones here, which is the normal text, no underline, no strike through. This is existing law.
Right.
And they put it in to show what's happening. And then these underlines are added in. And so these are new things that they're putting in. They're going to have this board that's going to propose ways to reduce units. And they have what they call, I don't remember the exact name, carbon exchanges of some sort, where you might be able to still pollute if you paid to fund a reduction of 1.1 units of corresponding emissions elsewhere in the same county. So for example, what this means is if you have a polluting vehicle or a facility and you're just going, I can't do anything about it, we're going to keep polluting. And they say, okay, well, we'll let you keep polluting so long as you pay money to fund carbon reduction elsewhere. So you might pay to put solar fields in for the solar plant or for the power plant or something like that. And then it's a trade system where because you offset carbon elsewhere, you're able to keep polluting in what you have. That's a pretty common thing. The federal government has that in place. That's one of the things they're looking at here. But this is one bill that would be good to go through in a little more detail. It's one that if you want to join a team's discussion, we could certainly go through and talk a little bit more about as we try and figure out exactly what's happening, who it affects, who it doesn't. But I do know that they will charge quite a bit more for vehicles that pollute more to relicense them. So curious to hear if you have any of you have thoughts on this bill. Clean air is something. And this is here you can see just an example of some of the fees. If your vehicle emits more than 0.16 grams per mile of nitrogen oxides, it's going to cost you $300 clean air fee when you register that. So that's each year. $100 clean air fee. And then they have this thing they call a pollution-free vehicle, which is probably a serious misnomer. There's even electric vehicles. They're not pollution-free. All the rare earth minerals and things involved. Those are all forms of pollution, just they'll be taking their toll at a different stage, different time. But even just the electricity to power it, most of that's still coming from coal. So again, I think it's a misnomer to say pollution-free, but I think they mean electric vehicle. And they probably use the word pollution-free in case it gets to hydrogen or something like that powered vehicle. But those are some of the basic ones. They have more though, where they say they have this base rate they apply. So the base rate's $50. And then in addition to the other applicable fees, if they have this many, emissions, you're going to pay the base rate. If you have this much emissions, you're going to pay twice the base rate, triple the base rate, depending on your emissions level. So essentially it lets you pay to pollute if you want to. And some people criticize that, saying, well, that just lets the rich continue to pollute and hurts the poor the most. So again, let me know, do you have any thoughts, concerns on this type of bill?
Seems like either way you pay. So you either pay in a new vehicle or a new stove or whatever, like we're paying no matter what if this goes through, you know. And in some ways, the more energy efficient or whatever, or less polluting, sometimes seems to cost a lot more.
Yeah.
So I got a question. This appears that, you know, they're encouraging people to move towards electric vehicles.
Yeah.
Is there any bills out there that are addressing the fact that we have all these electric vehicles on the road that aren't paying any road tax for the repair of the roads they're driving on?
That's a good question. I'd have to look and do a little searching on that. I know it's been discussed quite a bit as them needing to do something. So I wouldn't be surprised if there's some bill that talks about how they want to start taxing electric vehicles. But most of the push is to tax them per mile driven. And I think that they are experimenting quite a bit with ways to track how many miles you drive. Which again, with what we start to see coming into the car world, if they're going to ban the operation of cars on certain days, it wouldn't be surprising if one of the ways they start to enforce that is to say, oh, your car's just disabled with its software today. You can't drive it today, sorry. But I don't know the answer entirely to that. That's a good question, though.
Do you think that there's public interest in bills like this? Like, not public, sorry, private interest? So.
Yeah,
like
it was a question I was
being-
going to ask. Is who benefits? Tesla is going to have a lot of benefit from a bill like this, right? I'm not saying that Tesla has come and lobbied for it. I have no idea, but from a business perspective, you know, laws like California, where California, I think, has banned the sale of gas-powered vehicles after 2030 or 2035, somewhere in there. All the car companies know everyone's going to have to buy a new, more expensive vehicle. And so quite often there are private interests that push protectionist laws like this because they know it will produce a different shift in buying patterns and make people pay new things. Now, I haven't followed the money on this one. I don't know if there is money behind it or if it's just truly, we're just trying to find a way to clean up the air. But that is one of the real potentials with things.
In regards to cleaning up the air, I do laugh at the provision you can pay to pollute in one place if you try to pay for some anti-pollutant in another place. If you live in Salt Lake County, you can pollute all you want, make the air bad, as long as you pay for some in Utah County that makes the air less bad. I'm not sure how that benefits anybody in Salt Lake County. That's kind of funny to me.
Yeah, they did put in a provision to at least say that you had to pay for the reduction in the same county.
Okay.
So this bill does say that, but the federal law is called cap and trade under the federal law. And it's very much that way, where you can pollute all you want in Kentucky, but pay to reduce it in California and you're all good. And so it is a principle that does get interesting because I know even they had something where there was some area evacuated in Sandy recently, a business that had some high toxins or pollutants spill out or something. And there was a zone where the people living around this business had no idea that these super dangerous chemicals were there until they had some kind of leak. But you know, the government claims, oh yeah, you're far enough away that you should be fine. You know, if you lived within 50 feet of this place, it'd be dangerous, but 150 feet, you're okay. I don't know if those people are feel super enthused about that place continuing to pollute, if they reduce something out in Magna, if they help Rio Tinto reduce some pollution or something. And so it is a good point because most of the time, the closer you are to pollutants, the more dangerous it is to you, as opposed to across the county. In Utah, we have some enormous counties. And so, yeah, you could definitely reduce pollution in a level where it doesn't matter. But let me know if there's any other thoughts on that one. It's a good one to look at.
I think there was
Senate Bill.
Bill 55 was requested as well.
Yeah, so Senate Bill 55. I haven't looked at this one yet. So Jill, did you have any initial thoughts on this one?
Oh, no, I have to go back. Yeah, I probably did. I probably should make notes too. I'm just wondering if that ties in with the Utah Fits bill anyway.
It ties in with Utah Fits. So this one, at least according to highlighted provisions. So what's happened with curriculum is Utah's tried to place curriculum transparency into place where there's processes that school boards have to go through. And I think that they found there's a few holes in it in this process. So we have a local school board or a charter school governing board. And so this is saying we're going to make them do some additional steps on that transparency. And so from what I can tell with the Utah Fits bill, what I know about it, this one's not tied to Utah Fits. My bet is they're trying to clean up some of the holes that have come into place, where there's still some curriculum, there's still some materials that are getting approved outside of a transparent process. And so they're talking about here, the local school board shall. So if we have this, the local school board shall, and then they're adding in.
So this is targeting more of your local school boards rather than the state school board?
Correct. So
Okay.
the local school board, so Davis School District, for example, their board can choose new curriculum they approve or new materials for the classroom. And it's telling each local school board that they have to establish an open process that involves educators, parents of students, to review and recommend instructional materials for board approval. And then they have to post things online so you have time to look at it. They have to hold at least 2 public meetings to talk with parents. So they're doing a lot to add in parental involvement in, some parental say in these materials that are chosen, because we're getting to a place where education is becoming politicized. Strong political push to teach certain things, strong political push to not teach certain things. And so this is a process, from what I can see, that's making that more mandatory so that parents and educators, making the transparency more mandatory. But it's not, I can't see it tied to Utah Fits All bill. So yeah, that's one there. One other to look at, and I don't think it's been numbered yet. It's been in the news. But it goes along with this. This is interesting because this is now giving parents at least 2 chances to be heard at a meeting. So the school board has to hold a couple public hearings, and they're making this process take longer, making it more difficult to get things through, making them listen to parents. But the Utah legislature has said, hey, we have a solution for the Utah housing crisis, and we're going to do the opposite thing. They said that we feel if we let developers operate in the private free market, that they will build enough homes to solve the housing crisis here in Utah. And what this means is they are proposing to, when a developer comes into a city and says, hey, we want to build a new neighborhood, traditionally the developer had to go through quite a few hearings, quite a few public input processes. Citizens were allowed to go talk about the effect it would have on them and their neighborhoods and things. And the Utah legislature said, you know what? Or at least this sponsor of this bill says, you know what? If we just let the developers alone, take away a lot of these public hearings, process becomes faster, we build homes faster, and we'll solve the housing crisis. And so their proposal is to say citizens only get one public hearing on any new proposed development, and that's it. And after that, the city's basically just supposed to rubber stamp mostly the things that take place, provided it's within the general framework of what was
So I have a
approved at the initial
question on
hearing.
that.
Yep.
Is that taking away the city's, rights to do the inspections and things like that? Is that all going to go through the state now?
No, it's not taking away city rights to do inspections, but it is limiting what they can require at subsequent stages. And so currently you go in and you get preliminary approval, and then you have to go get approved. You have to build some things, do some things, and you have to get approved for final approval. And at each step of the way, cities and citizens could raise concerns. But they're kind of saying now with this proposal, everything has to be put forth up front, and the city has to follow exactly what was put forth up front. They can't change or deviate. They can't say, oh, this wasn't quite what we expected. And it makes it so the process is much faster. So they can still inspect. They can still say, for example, you have to build these things to X code and go out and inspect. But they can't account for changes or other things that take place. And work through the process over time, because some of these developments, like Daybreak, they're still building out Daybreak. I mean, imagine if there was only one public hearing on Daybreak. It's a huge development that
That would also
Is-
apply to that. What is it? That one out that way also in Harriman? Oker, what is that? They just had building a big division out there.
they've had a couple out there.
Olympia Hills, I think, is what they're.
Yeah, Olympia Hills is what I'm thinking of. Thank you.
Yeah, and with that, Daybreak comes in, builds a community, but do we have enough water to support that? Do we have enough, are roads big enough to support that? Just because they make the developer make roads inside the community, how does that impact roads outside the community? Can we foresee all these things at the beginning of something? Maybe with a small development, maybe. But I think with these big developments,
So will
Well,
that
it's-
fast track stuff, like when they're building this new baseball stadium out there now? Because they're the Millers are what? They're not gonna, the Bees are moving out there. They're building a new stadium that was just
Yeah.
announced.
yep.
So they'd only need one okay.
One chance for public input, yeah, and that would be it.
Okay.
If this bill passes, and I don't, again, maybe it came out today. As of last night, I don't think it was numbered yet. But they talked pretty openly about it to the news. It was in a KSL News article. And so that's one where they're looking to strip away citizen involvement, because they say, oh, you're making it too slow for the developers. Just leave it to the free market and we'll build enough homes. I
Trust
personally
them.
take a little pause with that. Sorry, go ahead.
So they're just blindly trust us when we
Yeah,
do that.
we'll build enough, and I don't doubt actually that they'll build enough homes. I believe that the developers will build enough homes. But I think my concern is, should there be some proper balance between just going out and building whatever? Do we have enough roads? Do we have enough water? Do we have enough power? All these different things to support this. Because developers don't care about that. They're not on the hook for any of that. They can build and build and build, create all kinds of issues and leave it to the people to solve. And so their incentives aren't tied together to properly manage these things, from what I see. Which I think is one reason why citizen input was healthy and appropriate throughout this process. I know it's a headache for developers to go through. But I think that when it comes to managing scarce resources like water, managing public infrastructure like roads, I don't think we can just build and pretend that, there shouldn't be anything. And again, they're not saying there's nothing. They're saying there's still requirements and stuff the cities can put in place but it's a one and done type deal.
Okay,
And
so that, like your previous thing, who does this benefit? The developers, right?
mhm.
So that's what I'm
Yeah, and
starting to ask on these bills, who it benefits.
yeah, and they would say it benefits Utah by it's going to help, lower rents and lower housing costs because of what's taking place. But we just have to decide is that the benefit we want? Are there other ways to achieve that? Should the government be involved in trying to lower rents? Now, certainly, I do agree the government process could be too onerous and too complicated and just take way too long. And so it'd be really to dive in and say, what is the proper balance here? But to me, it feels like we're going the wrong way to put too much power in the hands of developers. But that's my gut, but I don't know for sure. I'm not a developer. I haven't been through that process entirely. And so it'd be interesting to be able to really talk to them and, see what the appropriate balance there is. So we are at the end of our hour today. Tomorrow we'll go through some more. One that's really interesting to me that I want to talk about is Utah's proposing to create a separate business court to handle business lawsuits. And Delaware has a separate business court. They've made a lot of money off of it as a state. And I think that Utah is interested in following in that path, but it's an interesting thing because it is really a chance for, it creates a way for governments to make money, which I don't love taxes, but it does get concerning when governments can make money too. Very interesting incentives involved. So we'll try and talk about that. There's bills about firearm regulations, which are pretty interesting. Representative Lisenby is proposing banning state employees from enforcing any federal firearm regulation. And so that would produce some real interesting scenarios. And there's a couple bills on primary election revisions, some bills on clergy child abuse reporting. So we'll keep going through these, but if you have bills you want to talk about, email them over. I can look at them before. Or you can join us again if you want to in Microsoft Teams. We can start to chat about things. I know one of you had asked for that. We'll get those invites set out this week. But we'd love to keep the conversations going. So I'll stand.
Where would we mail the bills to? What email should we mail those to?
So you can email them to Tara or to me. Just whatever email you got with a link to this meeting in it, you can just reply to that.
Okay.
And send those. And then I'll always try and look at them before we get on these discussions. So thanks, everybody. We appreciate you being here today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Austin.